All right, so we have two guests who are joining us in the studio today. We have been commemorating the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and we shall continue until, well, Friday is our final day here because that's the final day of the Situation Room. But the day ends on Saturday. The guests are Gilbert Mitula Omware, who is a pro bono lawyer, an academic, a consultant in human rights, criminal justice, and legal research, and very many other things. Tell us about them, but let's just go with those ones first. Wishu. And Ivy Werimba is a communications and advocacy officer at Garlc Plus. Karibuni sana. Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you.
Ivy, at your communications and advocacy officer, we understand this one of Gilbert. He's a lawyer, works pro bono, that is, he does stuff for free.
Yes.
He's an academic, sour. He's a consultant in human rights, sour. Criminal justice and legal research, sour. You are a communication and advocacy officer, sour. But Garlc Plus, what's that?
So Garlc Plus is a membership organization based in Nairobi, and our mandate is to work with LGBTQ plus organizations and individuals across the country. So we have 17 member organizations scattered across the country, all of them working in different thematic areas. So this is around sexual and reproductive health rights. This is around HIV organizing. This is around mental health awareness, safety and security for LGBTQ plus folk, legal aid, and so many other things. So as Garlc Plus, as the coalition, we are mainly a coordination body. We don't exactly implement because our member organizations do this.
Implement what?
Implement the work that I quickly spoke about within the different thematic areas.
For the LGBTQ plus folk.
Yes.
In Kenya.
In Kenya.
Wakili, a quick one.
Yes.
LGBTQ. Is that legal in Kenya?
I think the question of whether a person is legal or not is debated across the world, isn't it? What makes you legal or illegal? But if we are directing your question to what the issue is what is criminalized in Kenya, rather. What is criminalized is sex against the natural or the order of nature, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that might span a lot of things that don't really go to your sexual orientation, your gender identity, sex characteristics, and so all of that. It could be for everyone what sex against the order of nature is, right? So people are not criminalized and cannot be illegal, whether they are immigrants or whether they are members of a particular minority. They can't be illegal people because they exist and have rights. But the question is around how they identify themselves, how they form community, how they exist, the ways in which they work, the ways in which people try to move on with their lives are what is targeted and what is generally then under attack in various ways.
So when you talk about LGBTQ,
Yes.
is it about people's sexuality or people's identity in organizing in various ways? What is it?
I think to exist is to be many things in many places in various ways. And so to be able to limit somebody's existence to their sexual orientation is really to limit them into just that. When they are family members, they are employees, business owners, there are various other things. And so I think it's very, very difficult to then start talking about a person's existence limited to just one narrow thing. Which is
so let me
their
ask the question a
orientation.
different way.
Yes.
When somebody identifies as folk in
Yes.
LGBTQ plus,
Yes.
what is it that they're identifying? Is it their sexual orientation? Or is it their dressing style? Or is it their career? Or is it their community? Is it their tribe? Is it their clan? What is it?
So if you look at what we call SOGIESC, isn't it? Well, it's an acronym. SOGIESC is sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. Then that now goes into the whole spectrum of what LGBTQI plus is. For example, if we look at sexual orientation, somebody would fall as, for example, and not being comprehensive, gay, lesbian, whatever else may come up, right?
Yep.
Then your gender identity, right? That is, for
Male,
example,
female.
Well, it's non-binary as well also exists, isn't it? Or gender non-conforming also exists in that person.
Does it?
It does, and we know people who are gender non-conforming.
Okay.
Yes, and who use the pronouns they, them, or other pronouns that may not necessarily exist in the English language, because this is a person who is identifying their gender identity not to fit into male or female, and that's, of course, where issues around trans people comes up. So we've talked about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So, of course, then there are people who, like me, I'm in a suit today, I wear a beard, I have my hair as it is, but my expression may be very different. For example, I may choose to have a beard but still wear lipstick and makeup and wear a dress, and so that's just how I express myself in terms of my gender, and so I may want to express my gender in different ways. And then comes the question of sex characteristics, which is where intersex people come in terms of their physical organs and what they have, which is, of course, something that not everyone can see, but still categorizes them in a way that may not fit into the larger spectrum of what people think is ordinary.
Okay, I do have a question.
Yeah.
If we are saying that the point is not to consider all the time the sexual orientation, or that the point is not the sexual orientation, we do spend quite a lot of time talking about the sexual orientation.
Who spends time?
Why? Because all of these explanations,
Even if you look at all these things,
these explanations that you've given here and
are
sex
sexual orientation.
characteristics,
Yeah.
if we're saying that the focus should not be, we spend a jolly good time talking about that particular focus. Why can't we talk about these other things? We spend a lot of time characterizing around the sexual part of it. How do we take the attention away from it if we spend a lot of time talking about it?
I think that's actually a question that Ivy and I were just talking about before we walked into the studio, which is the question of your identity and your existence and the full spectrum of being human. And that, for example, with the conversion practices research that we did, that you spend so much time trying to figure out who you are, how you exist, and your place in the world is, with so many barriers, that by the time you are getting to the point of exploring other things, then how do I work? How do I do well at work? Who am I in society? How do I contribute better? Unfortunately, the barriers to really getting to know and understand yourself, whether, for example, you identify yourself as a man, to understand your manhood, to understand what that means in society, and then the offshoot of that is then what are my contributions, what is my work, and all that. Because the barriers are there in understanding that, it takes such a long time to get to all of these other issues for very, very many people. That's why we spend time talking about
Are
it.
people
in my view.
who may not then associate with LGBTQ not going through the same journey, Ivy? That people are still on a journey to figure out who they are, and why then must we spend so much time trying to understand them? And this is everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's on this same journey, and this is my question. How about we just get to the work?
So I'd say everyone is actually going through the same journey, however you identify, with regards to your gender, with regards to your sexuality, with regards to everything, basically. We are, at the end of the day, human beings. And as human beings, we are left to deal with who am I, what are my contributions to the society, what does the society say about me, and how do I react to that, and vice versa. So it means that we are all in the business of figuring out who we are. And so the reason why LGBTQ plus folk are as vocal or as they are is because they have an impediment which lies within the law, where one thing about yourself or a perception of who you are say as a trans person, when you decide to fully express your gender finally, I present as a woman and so I dress up as a man. I fully express myself in that lens because that's who I feel I am. Immediately, there's backlash that comes from that. And immediately the thing that comes up is, why are you doing this? You caused this. You're asking for the trouble that's coming your way because you don't fit in the society, and on and on and on. So it means that we all are in the business of trying to figure out who are what, or how do women fit in the society? How do men, what role do men play in the society? And LGBTQ plus folk are also in the same business of trying to figure that out for themselves as well.
Ivy, I want to go back to that question. What has been criminalized in Kenya? Is it sexual activity or is it everything else? Is it expression? If I decided, okay, let's go with Gilbert and the example that he gave. You're wearing a beard. If you decided to wear lipstick in addition to the beard and put on, what are those other things, mascara and everything else, is that illegal? Or is that criminal?
It is not criminal, but it is still subject to violence, isn't it? Because it's about...
From law?
No, in law. Well...
So the law only criminalizes the activity?
The written law. Allow me to just be technical.
The written law
yes.
criminalizes the activity.
And
if you're
it
taken to
criminalizes
court,
activity for everyone, not just LGBTQI plus people.
Yes.
Yes.
For anyone who does sexual
engages
activity
sex against the order of nature.
Against the order of nature.
Yes, or male persons. So because 162C of the Penal Code talks about sex against the order of nature. Mm-hmm. Then 163 talks about attempts. Mm-hmm. Then 165 goes into indecent acts between male persons and attempts of indecent acts between male persons, right? So that is very specific about male persons. It doesn't talk about their sexual orientation or gender identity.
Okay.
Or their SOGIESC, as let me just use that. So the question is, if now my gender expression is that I wear a beard and I wear makeup and I wear a dress, is that criminalized? No, but you're still subjected to violence. The law doesn't. Of course, you will not be arrested for wearing lipstick as a man. Well, as somebody who identifies as male and who also looks the same, but so there's no arrest for that, but that doesn't mean you're safe or you're okay or things are fine moving on from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gender.
Yes.
If you decided that you want to identify as, well, you said you can identify as male, female, and then all those other pronouns, which you'll explain to us, I hope, because they're really
if
confusing.
we get the chance.
Yeah.
The law, again,
Yes.
does not criminalize that.
Yes. Well, let's talk about the case of Audrey Mbugua, right? And why Audrey Mbugua took her case to court. Audrey Mbugua, and the case that was presented was that this is a person who grew up with a male name, identifying as male, and so when they finished school, the certificates came up as male,
Yep.
isn't it?
Yep.
Then transitioned and became Audrey.
Yeah.
After this person became Audrey, of course, they now have certificates that they have in their hand that indicate male, but the person who's in front of you is seemingly female. Right? Can that person get work if they applied for a job? If that person wanted a police clearance certificate or a certificate of good conduct, can they get it? Just the most basic things, a driver's license, an identity card. Can that person get it? Because if we go, for example, to the question of transitioning, right? There is social transitioning, there's legal transitioning, and there's physical transitioning.
Yeah.
We are now focusing ourselves on legal transitioning. How do you exist? Because the conversation we're trying to have here is not about who you identify as to yourself and how you operate
express
within yourself.
yourself.
That's your own personal work to
Okay.
do. The question is, what
the
do
law
other
recognize-
people now do about it, right?
Does the law recognize your new self?
Exactly. And what is the law? If we go into the questions of now jurisprudence and we start talking about what is the law, where does it come from, how does it become law, how does it continue to be law, how is it enforced, what does that mean for people who are subjected to it? Then we start asking ourselves, if the foundations of that law are challenging somebody else's existence, how then do they continue to live a healthy life, enjoying all their human rights and everything that accrues with it, right? So we have to be very clear on what we are saying is the law and what the law facilitates.
And what was the outcome of the Audrey case?
Oh, the Audrey case, I think it should be Honorable Justice Lenaula, who sits in the Supreme Court now, allowed for Audrey to then have all the certificates changed, because the issue was NEC, the Kenya National Examinations Council, was refusing to change the certificates. And it was not for any other reason than that this person cannot exist, and the judge agreed with Audrey.
The person who issued the certificate was male.
Yes.
The person who's registered for the exam
Yes.
and sat the exam
Yes.
was male.
Yes.
And we issued a certificate to male.
Yes.
This is the person we don't know.
Yes.
And Justice Lenaula said...
Justice Lenaula said that these certificates need to be changed so that Audrey gets the certificates in the way that...
What was the basis of him
required.
recognizing Audrey?
It was not about recognizing Audrey. It was about Audrey making because you see, the issue for determination in that case was not about Audrey's recognition at all. It was about the administrative actions of Kenya National Examinations Council. Okay. And so the judge did not touch on anything to do with how Audrey identified.
So we don't have case law in Kenya on that?
On this particular
recognition
form of,
and identity.
The case law that we are having out of court right now is around registration and freedoms of association. We have, of course, major case law that's now in the Court of Appeal. And that case actually on registration, which is on NIGLHAC, the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, is now in the Supreme Court for determination on whether they should be registered or not. Audrey registered an organization for trans people, and that matter went to court and they were allowed to be registered. The state didn't appeal it. We have, of course, the decriminalization case, DECRIM, which is now Civil Appeal 153 of 2019. It's in the Court of Appeal. So we are awaiting arguments and final determination.
Something I don't understand.
Yes.
So what exactly is the beef? What is the problem?
Where? Please define. I want you to go and just tell me your question completely. Speak it completely.
Why is it that matters to do with LGBTQ, have I got it right?
Yes.
Plus. Plus. Why is it that every time it comes up, it is emotional? It is a big issue.
Yes.
I'm asking, what is the issue? What do you people defend? What are you defending?
You see, that is a very bad question to me. Why? Because somebody comes and beats me and you ask me, why were you beaten? And actually, I have to then start explaining the reasons and reasoning of a person who exercised violence on another person and speak for them. While what I'm supposed to be doing is looking for people who are going to be defending and taking care of me and protecting me.
Gilbert, no.
Yes.
The question is not why you were beaten.
No.
The question is why you are talking about being beaten. Well, you haven't been beaten yet.
You see,
let me try and explain, because some of the work that we do is around safety and security, where you will find, again, your identity, your sexuality, or the perception of it immediately invites violence most of the time. So you walk into a room and you maybe present as male. And immediately the assumption is if your mannerisms look feminine, immediately there's a question that comes up. And as a person who has grown up in our society, you are highly aware of what's happening around you. And immediately you move into a protective mode where all of us are want to self-preserve at the end of the day. So when you see that someone is coming towards you, immediately, however you interact with them will come from a very highly emotional place because you're looking to defend yourself at that point. Yeah.
You see, Gilbert, you went to...
Yes? Please allow me to take a break.
Please take a break.
Okay?
Yes.
Then now you can come back and continue the question. Gilbert Mitula Omware is a pro bono lawyer, academic consultant in human rights, criminal justice and legal research, and Ivy Werimba is a communications and advocacy officer at Garlc Plus. We are talking about the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and what's the view of the LGBTQ plus community in Kenya.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
With our guests, Ivy Warimba and Gilbert Mitula Omware. CT,
Yes.
your question now.
My question. When people respond in a way that you consider either threatening or intimidating, do you think it's out of an understanding or is it due to a lack of understanding?
I'd say the latter. I'd say the lack of understanding, where you walk in with a perception, with an idea of what you expect to see, of what you expect to hear. And when you are not met with that, immediately you react to it. Because a funny thing about us as human beings, I feel like we walk into rooms looking for ourselves in other people. And when you don't find that, or when you find something that is entirely different from who you are, your initial reaction will be to attack, or try to change it, or try to beat it into fitting into whatever your idea of what's good or bad.
And not try to understand it? The initial reaction is not try to understand it.
Not entirely. No, not entirely. Yeah. If we were to be honest with ourselves, we are usually, again, even when you look at your friend group, for example, you will find pieces of yourself within these people. They are separate and whole away from who you are, but there's parts of them that draw you in, that reminded you of yourself. And that's why you formed a connection. And so when you can't do that, when someone, for example, as earlier as I was saying, it's a man and you're a man, or you identify as a man and you meet another man, your immediate reaction is going to be like, we can, I don't know what men do, but banter about football and sports and da-da-da-da. And then this man all of a sudden has feminine characteristics or feminine actions. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, why is this man like this?
Why? Why does that happen?
That's what I'm saying.
Because is it different from what they're used to? It's different from what they would consider to be normal?
What is normal?
This is why I said what they consider to be normal.
Okay.
Is it
Yes.
different from that?
What you are accustomed
What you're accustomed to,
Yes.
what you're used to.
Exactly.
Right?
So immediately, if the person who's presenting as a man is behaving differently from what you in your mind you consider normal, then your reaction is going to be negative without question. There needs to be a pause that happens, I feel like, where you try, just watch and see what happens.
Okay. So as we have this conversation, then in relation towards the 16 days of activism, towards an end to gender-based violence. And I think the mistake that we've made in the past is to think that this gender then was only connected to females.
Yes.
Because unfortunately, a lot of the cases that we saw about gender-based violence, females were the victims and continue to be in the majority. Now, when we are having this conversation about an end to GBV, we can talk about the physical acts. But as we have seen the progression, a lot of it is psychological. A lot of the change that we ought to see then must be in the mind.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about being on the receiving end, where do you think the role then of those within this community then is played in getting the quote-unquote other side to understand the position from whence you come?
Wow. That's a really big question. Because my first thought is the conversation of what is violence and layering it, because you talked about psychological violence, but I also feel like there's other layers to it. There's emotional violence, there's verbal, physical, sexual violence, there's online violence, because now we have digital cells. And so when we break down what violence is, we can have that conversation for a really long time. When we now, present it to the fact that gender-based violence has, for the longest time, been centered around women, I also want to present a question where when we talk about women, these are people who were born as female or presented as female with their biology, and they identify as women. But then women are also layered. There's a tomboy, for example. So I still present as a woman, but then I identify as a woman, but my expression is male, for example. Or I am a man and I transitioned into becoming a woman. Or I was born female and I am
You've actually gotten to the heart of the matter. When we talk about what people are used to, it's a simplification of what people are accustomed to and what they find easy to deal with. Okay?
Yes.
Discrimination is something people are taught from a very early age. When you talk of tribalism, when you talk about a class system, all these, they are taught.
Yes.
People aren't born with these things. The capacity exists. Now, the question that I've always asked is, why is it that it gets to be rabid and violent when it's now sexual orientation? Why at that point? Because if you look around the world, discrimination based on just differences, whether it's language, whether it's color, it exists. So how do you get people to understand that a difference is just that?
Yeah.
Part of diversity. It has nothing to do with good or bad. How?
When you've asked that question, it's made me think of, I don't know if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers.
Who is Maxwell Gladwell?
Malcolm Gladwell is he's a journalist. He's an author. He's written various books. Blink.
You recommend that I read one of you? Okay. Maxwell Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm.
Yes, ask Nani. Malcolm Gladwell.
Maxwell Glacom.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes, Malcolm Gladwell. So he in Talking to Strangers, he presents various ideas. Well, it's a focus on this lady called Sandra Bland's murder by a police officer somewhere in Texas. And of course, it's a very emotive thing because it's a black woman who was murdered. But the issue that he tries to address is, why did this police officer come to the point where he murdered this woman?
And was the police person black?
He was white.
Oh dear.
And so the question was, this lady who was just going to a new job, what was the issue? What was the misunderstanding? One of the principles he lays out in the early chapters is this question of default to truth, where he says, first, the idea that any person you meet, if they present a story to you, you want to default to that as the truth. And you want to believe that because it is very critical to the way in which society comes together. If we don't believe the things we hear from other people, we cannot live in a society that trusts one another. So the reality is, from the foundational or formational issues that you are talking about, we have now come up in society or in a community that excludes intentionally and often without interrogation. Because that is how this society has continued to form itself and to form an identity. To challenge that truth becomes very, very, very difficult, because you then challenge the foundations of this society. He talks about, for example, the issue of these scams and the fact that we have scammers who come up and they steal from you all the time. But even when you are in the middle of that scam, you still try somewhere in your head to believe this is not a scam. This is not a scam at all. It's actually going the right direction. You have a default to truth that is fundamental to how you exist. If we then take that concept and we transpose it into the question of the LGBTQI plus community, the problem is that societally we have a default to truth that this issue that we are talking about challenges. And that it is so difficult to challenge that default to truth and to become skeptics about what we have grown up and been socialized to believe, that now when we come to the point of having the conversation, everyone's like, no, I'm not willing to accept because this is not something that I have seen as real or familiar to me. And so then how do other people respond? Because it's not just about what you believe, but your responses. And people respond in various ways. Other people will want to pray so that they can, because that is also another familiar tool that they have. Let's pray this away. We have to deal with that by praying it away. Other people then go to the full spectrum of violence is what I have known or I have inherited over time, because I can say definitively that violence is also an inheritance that people get. I have inherited violence as a tool of addressing things that challenge my ideas or my ideology, and that I'm going to use that, exercise that tool of violence to be able to challenge this thing that is unfamiliar, because you are now challenging the foundations of how I understand myself, my community, my family, and the world to be. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Well, you make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I think that is my understanding of the question that you're asking and why people are having this struggle.
Often when people try to solve a problem, they get to the genesis and ask themselves what this problem actually is.
Yes.
And then you ask why it exists.
Yeah.
Then you ask, how do you get to a point where this matter that we refer to as a problem is understood more as a concept and as an issue, not necessarily a problem? How do you get to understand it? You see, the moment you have a labeling and it acquires a negative connotation, then that connotation carries the day.
And that's marketing and branding anyway.
Yes. Nobody bothers to look beyond that. The takeaway home is that this is the situation. Now, unfortunately, again, when you are talking about matters that the discussion around has always been a sexual orientation in an African setting, that discussion becomes not just highly motivated, it's combustive. It's not something that people are going to discuss calmly.
Can I qualify that African setting and just add in a post-colonial African setting?
That would be appropriate.
Yes, because we have to talk about...
It would be accurate.
Yes, it has to be a post-colonial African setting, so that we say that we were in a scenario where we had certain values living as community. These values were altered, whether by force or otherwise, and that to that extent have then continued to crystallize over time and become familiar to people. But the thing is that it has to be an exploration still of identity and community in that context. Then now we talk about the volatility.
Do you ever bother to explain that the community we now refer to as LGBTQ existed in African societies, again, post-colonial times?
Yes.
I think pre-colonial or post-colonial?
No, I meant pre. Sorry, not
Yes.
post. Pre.
No, because this
Post
is
now
a
pre.
thing that has
pre.
been recorded in very many ways, in very many contexts, but of course using different language. And I think the problem here is what was the language that was used to identify LGBTQI plus people in a pre-colonial era. What spaces existed for this community in a pre-colonial era? Books have been written about the issue and how even in spiritual contexts there were two-spirit people, for example, in certain contexts. Of course, arguments have been made about woman-to-woman marriage and what that looks like. Of course, that had nothing to do with sexual orientation, but it had a lot to do with community and how it existed, and really about the functions of people and how they presented. So we really have, and of course now at hand, I may not have those very specific books that I can refer to people, but I can look at it. But we have contexts in which there were LGBTQI plus people existing in various ways, in various functions in the community for very many centuries before we were colonized.
And even to just add on to that, like our languages are the easiest access to understanding just how fluid we were as a community, as a people, pre-colonial times. When we struggle with they, them pronouns, when we struggle with he, she pronouns, there is, Kiswahili, for example, nothing is gendered in Kiswahili. Unlike in English, in French even, where the kettles are gendered or lamps are gendered, doors are gendered, everything is gendered. But then when it comes down to African languages, we left it fluid. We were just like, everything is as is, everything belongs here, we are all one people, and we moved.
So then why are we heading into pronouns then? Why not just go back into that era where we are not focusing on the pronoun?
But then,
and now actually that segues into where you explaining the pronoun. Why are people identifying as he, she? What are the others?
They. Yes.
What are all these others?
I think we are stuck as well, where we were left with languages that weren't ours and we had to deal with them as a way of being a part of a society that still doesn't want us to exist, which is an even bigger problem that all of us should, have a meeting and have a conversation about. But we were left with the languages that don't belong to us, and to be able to just express ourselves or explain in spaces in a way that people understand, we have to use the language. And
Ivy and Gilbert, would one be wrong, or would I be wrong in saying that the discussion that we are having now emanates from a Western perspective of this same discussion, and we are trying to transpose that discussion into an African setting. And because of the Western orientation of this same discussion, it becomes a very, very difficult thing to discuss, because the same subject could be discussed.
Square peg, round hole.
Yes.
I have something to say about
Please.
that, actually, which is this, that, existence and identity is something that has been explored in various cultures around the world. The problem is that with colonialism, we then had a new frame and language within which to have these conversations. And then that came with the whole idea of globalization. Things that we already had, we already knew, and knowledge that had already existed for centuries was first extinguished, then new ways of knowing, understanding, learning, what we call epistemology, introduced. Imposed, really. And then after this epistemology is imposed, of course, with development and so forth, we now have the same people who robbed us of these things coming back to tell us the same things again. And so it's not anything new or strange or different. It is the language that we are using that is new, because it is language that, of course, has to be borrowed because it's the frame of colonialism and globalization. But we are not coming to new or strange conversations at all, or even saying that it is a Western idea, because there are many things that, as we have discussed, existed even outside of the Western frames of knowledge and understanding, including spirituality. And that is why, for example, we can say that we exist now, but we're a cumulative of our ancestors and the people who all came to bring us to this point where we are at, as Gilbert and as myself and as everyone else who is here.
I think if I want to go back to that issue of pronouns, and one of the things that we talked about now is an understanding. An understanding is pivotal in all of this. If we're saying that he, she, man and woman, male and female, is what people have been used to, and now we are saying that don't necessarily call me he or she, now call me they. Look at the other side of it. Are we not now compounding things and now saying, why should we get to that point whereby we're changing things completely from what we knew them to be? He, she, clear. And this comes back to my original question, that we spend quite a lot of effort trying to explain some of these things. And then we say, then give us an opportunity to still operate in society and in community as normal. But we spend a lot of effort trying to explain some of these things as to why somebody is no longer he and why they are they, why somebody is no longer she and why she then becomes they. As opposed for me to just focus on doing the work.
You see, Ndu, you've gotten the heart of the matter. Why I brought in the idea of the Western influence is what someone sitting on that seat yesterday, gentleman, Professor Kagwanja, brought in an interesting concept, dialectics. It's dialectical.
Yes.
You see, because this very same thing that, because of the language, the frame as you call it, the he, they, she. You see, now, that discussion, in my mind, I understand the genesis, I even understand the germane aspects of it. But the manner in which it is presented, is it really African? The answer it is no. Because when you look at the Western concept of their existence and how they look at themselves from a societal perspective, you begin with the I. We begin with the we.
We, exactly.
Very different. So even when you arrive at the conclusion of description, our identity is with everything around us.
Yes.
It's a communal identity.
Yes, we are not whole without that community. Now, theirs is completely different. So now, when you bring an idea, as you say, something that we understood in the way we understand things, but then you bring a Western frame to discuss it. Can you see the collision?
Yes.
Yeah.
Something that could have been understood now presents itself with.
I just want to understand as we conclude the pronouns.
Wavupi.
Yeah. Explain the pronouns.
Eric, let me ask you.
Yes.
What pronouns do you use in Kiswahili?
We are not speaking Kiswahili. We are speaking
No.
By the way,
I just want to understand. Do you use pronouns in Kiswahili?
No.
No, you don't. In I don't know what your traditional language is, but
No.
in traditional languages, do you use them? So this is not necessarily a question of the pronouns,
It's
but
okay,
the language.
Gilbert.
Now, let me start there. I'm building a frame. Allow me to build a frame.
We don't have much time. So let's just go into teaching people,
Yes.
because people are listening and people have been getting confused.
Okay.
This one identify, they write he, she, they. What are those? And what do they mean? When you see somebody saying I identify as he, she, or this, him, her, what are those?
Simply put,
Yes.
he, him is what you were taught in school.
Okay.
It's a man
Yes.
or a boy, male presenting.
Yes.
She, her is a woman, identifies, expresses as a woman.
Okay.
They, them is someone who chooses gender non-binary, gender non-conforming. So they don't
They're neither male nor female.
exactly. So they present as those pronouns.
Okay.
And that also with he, him, and she, her, that also goes to trans people as well. If a trans person walks up to you, however they express, however they look to you, and they say, my pronouns are he. Like right now, if I told you my pronouns are he, please just use them. I said,
So then you
I'm
can
a
come
he.
tomorrow and say she.
No, I said he.
No, that's today.
No, that's what I'm saying today. So
You're
if
he.
you come tomorrow and say
say,
I
"I'm
am
now
they,
she."
then I also must
It's not
accept that.
fluid like that.
It depends on different people, but I don't want to go there. What I'm
Okay.
saying is because
When
again
someone
you
says
said
he,
time. I'm
When
keeping
someone
time.
says he, it's masculine. She, feminine. They,
It's gender non-conforming.
Yes.
gender non-conforming.
Yes.
Where?
So,
Hi. Gilbert Mitula
Yes.
is a lawyer, an academic, a consultant in human rights, criminal and justice and legal research. Thank you very much for joining us, Gilbert.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you as well, Ivy Werimba, who is the Communications and Advocacy Officer at Garlc Plus. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen.